Hello, Clint, Lisa, how are you?
Hi,
Hi, how are
good.
you?
How are you?
Very good. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Sure.
Glad to
Thanks
do
for
it.
having us.
Very good. Are you in San Francisco?
In a general area. We're
Yeah.
north of San Francisco, across the bay.
A little town
Okay.
called Belvedere, which is where Meg used to live.
Right,
Um,
right.
Yeah.
So is that how you met her, living there?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, we met her down in Orlando because,
No. We met her here at the McAuliffe's house.
well,
Christmas party.
well, maybe that wasn't. Okay, I'll forget what I was.
Met her in multiple places. I've learned when my wife tells me where I met someone, I just say, yep, that's where it was.
Well, remember we met her with at a Christmas party at the McAuliffe's, and you realized you had a mutual friend that was in the Secret Service that used to work at Disney, who unfortunately then passed away.
Oh, really?
Dan?
Don.
Yes, Don. Okay.
Yeah, we have, I was at Disney for 26 years and we had a lot of very Secret Service, Homeland Security, FBI. Disney really recruited from those areas to help with our security.
Yeah, he was in charge of security, Don Flynn.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I knew Don,
Yeah,
and I didn't even know he passed away.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, good. So your book launched 6 days ago.
Right. It's been a whirlwind.
I'm sure it has been. I love the frame picture behind you. That's a great idea.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. My wife just finished a book, comes out in the spring. We're not sure when yet. And I published a book in August of 2020. So we learned a lot, and I'm now her official marketing manager. We're trying to sell twice as many books for her as they did for me. So
Oh, good. It's,
Yeah.
it's all on the authors.
I know it is these days. It is.
Yeah.
Good. Well, so I got through, I read all but I think 2 chapters of the book. So it was fantastic. And the photos are amazing. The one where she is falling off the horse just is incredible. I mean, talk
Yeah.
about taking a head dive off anyway.
Yeah.
It was impressive. So what I'm going to do is I put together an intro. I'll welcome you all. And then I love to get a little bit about your backgrounds. Clint, one of the lines I have here is, did you ever believe that a young orphan boy in North Dakota would have such incredible life experiences?
That's
And
true.
kind of have you talk about that. And Lisa, I'm going to say you're no stranger to the Secret Service. If I have my story straight, this is the 4th book you've penned together about the
Correct.
Secret Service, correct?
Yes.
And then
No.
I'd love to hear a little bit about your background at Smith, is it Babson?
Babson College. Mhm.
Yeah, and a little bit of coming up. And then, we'll jump into the book. I just got some comments I'm going to make, but I know you all know what to do because you can't always rely on the interviewer to ask the right questions. So I'm sure you're going to talk about what you want to talk about. And this is your podcast. As you go, whenever you stop, I'll ask another follow-up question or lead it along, and we'll make sure. And at the end, I'll let everyone know, it is out now, and repeat the title. And then if there's any websites you want to direct anyone to, just go ahead and say that on the show, and we'll put them in the show notes. And then, not to be too dramatic, but I'm lining up to publish this show in a few weeks, and I'm going to talk. I'm kind of opening up the show with 59 years ago this week. Clint Hill was in Dallas, Texas, and tell a little bit of the background to that story.
That's fine. That sounds good. Mhm.
Okay, great.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we're already recording, and they'll cut out all this stuff we talked about earlier. So I'll kick it off. And as you all know, this is all recorded. So if we want to stop, go back, whatever we can do, we can just keep recording and talk, and they'll edit it and we'll sound brilliant.
Okay.
Excellent. All right. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Come Rain or Shine. Dan Cockerell coming to you today from São Paulo, Brazil. And through the magic of technology, I have two guests coming from just across the bay in San Francisco. And, I've done over 200 episodes now. And this is the one I think I'm the most excited about, and the one I've done the most homework on. So I'm just going to kick it off and we're going to get it going here. I'm not going to give a lot of suspense to you. So I'd like to welcome Clint Hill and Lisa McCubbin Hill, the authors of My Travels with Mrs. Kennedy. It came out October 25th, 2022. But before we get into the book and talk to Clint and Lisa, here's a little more context. 59 years ago this week, Clint Hill was in Dallas, Texas, riding in the follow-up car behind the president and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy's limousine. As he heard shots ring out, he leaped onto the back of it and shielded Mrs. Kennedy and the stricken president with his body as the car raced to Parkland Memorial Hospital. And we all know the rest of that story. Well, this day was burned into Clint's memory. However, I know by reading My Travels with Mrs. Kennedy, Clint has so many other wonderful memories of his time with the Kennedys, and specifically Jackie Kennedy. See, he was assigned to her security detail when she became First Lady, and a couple years after her husband's death. So he knew her very, very well. And his wife, Lisa, is no stranger to the Secret Service either. In fact, she and Clint have penned 4 books about the Secret Service. And also that day. So I'm going to leave it there and just say, Clint and Lisa, welcome to Come Rain or Shine. How are you doing today? And I think the biggest thing, thank you so much for joining the show.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having us. Yeah, we're doing great. Excited to have our new book out and glad to be with you.
Yes, it's our pleasure to be on your show, Dan.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I'll tell you, as you said, a book launch is a whirlwind. And so before we jump into the book and some of the things that just jumped out at me about history and about the Kennedys and Jacqueline Kennedy and Clint, your experiences. First of all, Clint, if you want to talk a little bit about your upbringing and background, and as a little foreshadowing to that, did you ever believe that a young orphan boy from North Dakota would grow up and have such incredible life experiences?
Well, that's a very true statement. I was born in North Dakota, and 17 days after my birth mother realized she couldn't care for me, so she turned me over to an orphanage. And I only was in that orphanage then for a few months before I was adopted. Brought up in a small town called Washburn, North Dakota, 912 people. And loved it there. It was a wonderful place to grow up. Went away to college, Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. And then I had to go into the Army because it was the end of the Korean War. And everybody was, I was subject to the draft. I was taken to the Army, went to Fort Leonard Wood for a basic training, and they gave me a whole bunch of tests. And they decided that the place for me was at the Army Intelligence Center in Fort Hollywood, Maryland, where I was then sent and trained to be a counterintelligence agent. I did that for a period of a few years, and then when it was time to get out of the military, I had originally wanted to be a coach and a history teacher, so I thought I'd give that a shot. I went back to North Dakota and looked around, see what kind of jobs there were, and I couldn't find anything that really was that interesting. And so I went back to where I had been living in Denver, Colorado, and I sought out employment there. I had known some of the men in the Secret Service who were with President Eisenhower, because when I was in the Counterintelligence Corps, which was an Army contingent, President Eisenhower came to Denver, had a heart attack, and was hospitalized at Fitzsimmons Army Hospital. Because of that, our cooperation with Fitzsimmons, we worked with him all the time. I got to know some of these men, and I really liked who they were and what they did. So I decided I would give that at least a shot. I then applied for a job with the Secret Service. Now, they just don't give you the job overnight. They run a full background investigation. And so I had to have some kind of income in the interim. So I got myself a job as a detective with Chicago, Burlington, Quincy Railroad. And after all the background was done by the Secret Service. They said, okay, you're approved. We're gonna swear you in on September 22nd, 1958. And I terminated my job with Chicago, Burlington, Quincy, and I went over to the Secret Service. And from there, it's with history. I was in Denver for 1 year, and then they put me at the White House, and I remained there for the rest of my career in the Washington, D.C. area.
Wow, what a journey. And then in between, as we'll talk about in the book, lots of travels with the First Lady, and I'm sure with the other administrations you served in. And Lisa, you're from Massachusetts. You were a television anchor. You spent 6 years in the Middle East. You wrote a book back in 2018 about Betty Ford. So it seems like you are quite the historian buff also.
Well, it's funny, Dan, I actually never was a history buff. I ended up working with one of Clint's former colleagues, Jerry Blaine, on a book he was writing back in 2009. And Jerry Blaine was an old family friend of ours, and he had been on President Kennedy's Secret Service detail. And then he was retired, and he was writing a book. He couldn't get it published, so he asked my assistance, and we worked on it together. And during that time, I met Clint Hill, because I hadn't studied the Kennedy assassination. I wasn't a Kennedy buff. And so I had to learn all of this myself. And I asked Jerry, I need to meet someone who was actually at the assassination. Is there anybody I could talk to? And Jerry Blaine himself was on the midnight shift, and he wasn't there in Dallas. But Clint was. So he said, yeah, Clint Hill, but Clint Hill doesn't talk to anybody. So he won't talk to you. But I guess he really worked on you, right, Clint?
He did. He made some concessions, and I finally agreed just to get him off my back pretty much. If you go ahead and talk to you for 2 hours, I thought that wouldn't hurt anything. So I made the arrangements. You made the arrangements for a location, and we met in Washington, D.C. in August of 2009, and I talked to you for 2 hours.
And he made a mistake at the end of our interview. I asked him if I had any follow-up questions. I might have few questions I want to ask him. So would he give me his phone number? Because up to this time, he hadn't shared any contact information with me. It was all done through the other guy. So he made the mistake of giving this investigative reporter his telephone number. Well, then I used it.
And I knew better. I knew I shouldn't have done it, but at the spur of the moment, I did it. I know maybe it was her beauty that caused me to do it.
Aren't you glad you did?
I'm a lucky man that I made that mistake.
There you go.
Yeah, so I called, and he really helped a lot with that first book, which was called The Kennedy Detail, published in 2010. And then Clint came around with us on the book tour, and the publisher and I convinced Clint to write a book himself. He had sworn he would never write a book, and he told me he would never write a book. But we convinced him that he had such wonderful memories of his time with Jacqueline Kennedy. So in 2012, we published our first book together called Mrs. Kennedy and Me, which really goes into detail, covers a lot of the time at the White House, different things that happened, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, and more historic things. And so it's different than this book. Subsequently, Clint and I wrote 2 additional books, 5 Days in November, which is all about the assassination, and then 5 Presidents, My Extraordinary Journey with Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford. So through all of this, I became a historian. I call myself an accidental historian, and it's all because I met Clint Hill, who lived history. And so I get this front row seat to all of his wonderful stories. And he's got the stories, and I guess I'm the one with the writing skill. I'm a good speller. So we make a good team.
Good partnership. Well, I'll tell you, Clint, thank you, Lisa, for sharing that. I think probably the fact that your reputation was he doesn't talk to anybody, and they really had to talk you into it. Something I saw throughout the book was your discretion and how important that was to Jacqueline Kennedy, and having someone she could trust, and the advice you gave her. You'd mentioned you all got to a point where she would just give you a look and you knew whether it meant back off or let's get out of here, or, she really had a lot of trust. And I love the stories, in today's day and age, even going to photographers at some of the private events and saying, look, you need to give me your film because you didn't want anything to go out that she had not approved. And I think that's probably a tribute to probably that one of the most things she, I think she assumed you were going to keep her safe, but I think to watch her and make sure everything that came out and what she wanted the public to know about and what was private, she felt very comfortable with. And I would assume that's one of the reasons you all spent, so many years together, and she specifically requested you to be by her side on all these international trips.
That's the reason she trusted me. I could trust her. I respected her, and she got to respect me, and she knew that I was looking out for her best interest. And so because of that, she gave me more responsibility, and more responsibility. Got to a point where when we went on a trip to Rebello, Italy in 1962, the only people who came with her and her daughter Caroline were her personal assistant / maid and me, and I was there to represent not only the Secret Service, but the Office of Protocol, talking to foreign governments, the press secretary. I had to deal with the press. I had to do it all.
One-stop shop.
And what I was the only one available. Nobody else was there.
Yeah. And that's something I know in the book you talked about, the attention the president gets versus the first lady. They both need to be protected. And I'm sure a lot of that's changed over the years, but I think that was one of the big things, that you didn't have someone when you were a team of two. There was no one to take over from you. It was 7 days a week for years on end. And so I guess the commitment, if you didn't get along with whoever you're protecting, that could be a pretty big issue.
Oh, very much so. Yes, it definitely would affect what we're doing.
Something else that struck me was I just started doing a little bit of math. And at the time, I mean, there's a few things that popped out in the book that you put, and other things that I did on my own. But I think at the time, around that time, she was 31. You were 34, maybe, while you were protecting her. I mean, you were both in your.
I was younger than she was.
Oh, you were younger than she was. Oh my gosh.
She was 31.
Oh, that's right. She was 29. Yeah.
So
you were in your late 20s.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I just can't, it blows my mind to think, I mean, is there an age today that you can be allowed to be in the Secret Service, or is that
well, I don't think anybody's in the Secret Service less below the age of 20, maybe 22. I'm not sure. But,
okay.
I was 28 when I got assigned to her in the fall of 1960, November 1960. I was 28 years old.
Wow. And she was 31, right, when she became First Lady.
Correct. Yes.
So, which is still very young. I mean, I have a son right now that's 31 years old, and I can't imagine,
to be someone in the most, kind of one of the most powerful countries on earth, and to have that responsibility.
And there's no guide for it. There's no book that tells you how to act or what you expect or anything else. You're just thrown into that job of First Lady, and you have to deal with it best you can.
Wow. The other one was really interesting to me, was this dynamic of her, you all going in the UK, meeting the Queen of England. And I think the Queen was 35 at the time, and she was 31 or 32. So once again, extremely young. And then the thing that stuck out to me most, I don't know why this was such a big thing, but Jacqueline Kennedy were only married for 10 years, and they, obviously they're timeless now, but it was a very short time that all this happened, and all this rise and just being so famous. And it's just, it blows my mind how fast it happened. And once again, I think how young everybody was at the time. So I have a question for you, because one of the, I think, things that I was looking up a little bit about Jacqueline Kennedy, and I think in the book you quoted, Mrs. Kennedy had no interest in politics, but in just 3 years in the White House, she proved herself to be arguably one of the best ambassadors the United States has ever had. So what, I mean, it's kind of a dumb question, but you say, what was it? What was it about her and that time and that place and her personality? What was it that just made that all come together, that she was so popular and arguably, in India, more popular than Queen Elizabeth, arguably more popular than the president in certain places she visited? What created that dynamic?
But created it was her willingness to be able to relate to the local populace, the major, just the general population of all those countries. One of the reasons that was possible was she spoke fluent French, fluent Italian, fluent Spanish. So I know, for example, you said you're in Sao Paulo. I mean, she would have to speak Portuguese if we were going to be in Sao Paulo, I presume.
Yeah, that's right.
But she also studied before we went to any one of these places. She would study like crazy at what that country was dealing with. She knew when she got there exactly, what the situation was. And then she would deal with the politicals, but not in a political nature. And then she would go out and deal with the locals. And that's the part that she loved the most, is that going out and talking to most, going to the hospital, seeing the kids that were in hospitals and trying to cheer them up and see what we could do as a country to help them and things of that nature. She was just awesome in that regard. And that I wasn't the one that at first called her an ambassador, the greatest ambassador. The ambassadors that were present themselves made those statements directly to the Secretary of State and to the president, that she turned out to be the best ambassador of all.
Yeah. And it's, I was, I think it's pretty widely known, her fluency in French, but that really surprised me in the book about Italian and Spanish. And her, I think there was a part of the book where you went to the Orange Bowl in Miami, and she got up and gave a speech. It was after the Bay of Pigs, and gave a speech and memorized in Spanish, and just everyone just went crazy.
That's
because
true.
I guess that respect.
And that was true in Mexico City or in Venezuela or Colombia with regarding Spanish. I mean, she wowed the people. I mean, when the president would speak, and he usually spoke rather briefly, and then he would introduce his wife, and she would then speak to them in their native tongue, and they loved it. It was really interesting to watch and fun to see, in fact.
I'm sure it was.
She had a natural curiosity. You mentioned India. It was the first time an American first lady had ever visited India or Pakistan. So that in itself, it was kind of, a nod to those countries, so that people were really excited that someone of her stature would come. And in terms of speaking the language, the first time you saw it, Clint, was in Paris, right?
Right.
And she spoke directly with the French president, Charles de Gaulle.
Yeah.
And the President Kennedy, he had to have a translator. So, here was his wife really able to interact much more closely and intimately.
Yeah, and on occasion, de Gaulle would say something that she wanted the president to hear, but the president didn't understand it because he said it in French. So she would act as the interpreter. Yep. I mean, it was very interesting to watch. And other higher officials in the French government also. André Malraux, the Minister of Culture. I mean, he and she got along so well because they both were interested in the arts. And it was all in French. And I kind of got left behind because I don't speak French.
Sure. In the book, you just talked about how people were just enthralled with her to be able to do that. And it seems like it wasn't just the language, but she came from a pretty wealthy background, and we went to the right colleges and very affluent, but the humility and the empathy she had not only, you talked about her visiting these hospitals and wanting to visit kids and being, shaking hands and really having an authentic interest in others. And also, the first lady, making you a full scrapbook of all the adventures together. And you mentioned she would do her sketches and give those to people's gifts. I mean, she just had this, I guess, this very sophisticated look of the world, but also this basic respect for other humans. And I think that was probably made a big impression on the world because of the United States stature and its power for someone to be so friendly and so, I guess, respectful of these other cultures.
I think that had a lot to do with how well she was received. Yes. And she was
Fantastic.
well.
One of my favorite quotes is Nelson Mandela. He says, if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. So I think that's probably what she did. She went to people's heart by talking and speaking their language.
That's very true. That's exactly the situation.
So in the book, you really, it's kind of the intrigue when you're cleaning out your old house and going and opening these chests, and Lisa's coming down and saying you'd go up and she'd be going through it. And then later you'd find some things and say, hey, guess what I found, and make her wait to see what it was. So had you ever thought about any of the things you had there, or was just life just flying by and you just sort of forgot about it?
Well, I'd forgotten about most of the stuff because I put stuff in that trunk that we found in the garage that she found. And
it all started, it was in 2019.
Yeah.
And Clint had this house, since
1967, I bought it.
And but he hadn't really lived there for the previous 10 years and decided to sell it. So we went there just to clean out the house, and we stumbled across this trunk. And that's how the book begins, is the finding of this old steamer trunk.
Yeah.
Which you really had forgotten about, right?
I forgot it was even there. And then you uncovered it by finding it underneath a wet vac in the garage. And
it said, here was this trunk, and it said in big white bold letters, Clinton Hill, the White House, Washington, D.C. Wow. I mean, it was like, wow, what's in here?
It's like something out of National Treasure.
Yeah.
And then once we got it open, out came the stuff, and it was much better condition than I anticipated it would be. But there were things in there I just completely forgotten about.
Yeah. And that opened up all these memories that engaged you to decide to write the book.
Yeah. Every time she'd pull out something, it was a new memory, recalling it, something that had happened years previous.
Yeah. But I sort of had to drag it out of him. There were, at first we opened it up and there were these crumbling boxes, and he said something like, see, it's just Air Force One playing cards and presidential pins, nothing of any consequence.
Yeah, should we just throw it away?
Yeah. And I said, wait, Clint, some people might think Air Force One playing cards that have never been out of their cellophane wrapper
could be something of interest. Wow.
Yeah.
Something for the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
So,
or a Zippo cigarette lighter with a presidential seal on it.
They used to give out Zippo lighters because everybody smoked at the time.
Yeah, the president had them made. The company that makes Zippo lighters provided them.
I'm sure he did.
Get them away.
Yeah. So I want to hit on three other topics before we wrap up here. One is, and I'm not going to get into this in the book, but a chapter that caught my attention was, entitled "The Miami Incident," and I'm just going to leave it at. I thought it was very brave of you and vulnerable to talk about what had happened, because I know you were, have thought for your whole life about that day in 1963 and the assassination. And I know that was a very tough time for you. So if you get the book, you're really going to learn a lot about Clint and, kind of what he fought through to kind of get back to where he needed to be again. But I think to end the podcast here on a lighter note, I want to hit two topics. One is the topic of presidential Secret Service code names. And I don't know the history behind that, but you mentioned in the book a couple of the code names of Jackie and Caroline, and I did my own research to look up John Kennedy's name. So how did those become? Who created those, or were they done sort of by just through culture and on the fly?
They're created in cooperation. The heads of the Presidential Protective Unit and the White House Communications Agency. It's an Army agency, military, and they actually create the code names, but they have to be approved by the Secret Service guy in charge at the White House. And for example, President Kennedy's name was Lancer, and her name was Lace. And then there was Lyric and Lark, the two children.
Yeah.
And all the Secret Service personnel, their code names started in D. Like Diesel was one of them, and Debut was my assistant because he got that name because it was so young. Dresser was another guy that I worked with, and he got the name because he was a smart dresser. They gave me a name. I never have discovered why they gave it to me. They called me Dazzle. And I never could understand why they decided that I would have the handle Dazzle.
Well,
see, you're quick to say that. And it's funny. I read that in the book. And before I even asked on this podcast why you had it, you were quick to say you didn't know, which I really don't believe at all. So Lisa, I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, it was just assigned to him. It's not like he picked it out, but clearly he has a dazzling personality. And, I think that had to have come out. And in a lot of these photographs, I found pictures of him where he was laughing. And, after the assassination, he went for many, many years, decades without laughing or smiling. And so to see him as a young man, joking around, and you can just see it in his eyes. He definitely was a dazzler.
Well, if you don't mind me saying, Clint, I saw some of the photos of you all when you're in Italy in the boat with you and one of your other agents, and with your shirts off, and you were pretty easy on the eyes, I'm telling you.
I never looked at it that way.
All right. I knew you wouldn't. Well, I'll tell you what, this, the book just came out October 25th, My Travels with Mrs. Kennedy. How is sort of the launch going so far, and what kind of feedback are you getting?
We're getting great feedback. We've had some really good press. The reviews are coming in, and sales seem to be doing great. So, we just want to get it out there. And it's kind of, somebody said at one point when, the news is so bad every day, it seems one thing after another. And somebody said, we could all use a little bit of Camelot right now.
Yeah,
so
this
kind of takes you back to that. Hold on, just one sec.
Sure. We can edit this part out.
You have to excuse me. There's a COPD calling.
No worries. No worries.
Okay, I
You
got
good
it.
now?
I'm good
Okay.
for right now.
We can pick it up from there.
So somebody said, we could all use a little bit of Camelot right now. And I think this book takes you back to this time of innocence, and the photos show what a different time it was. And, it's really a lovely story, but then it also, as you mentioned, shows what Clint had to deal with, and he tells stories he's never told before. He deals with a suicide attempt. And one of the reasons that we chose to put that in the book is, we hope that it would help people who are struggling, and to see that, even someone like Clint, who was so brave and courageous, can have those feelings and deal with it. And, we've already heard from people that have read the book or heard some of our podcasts and have said that just hearing him talk about that has helped them with their own struggles.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, a nod to you, Clint, because when I was reading it, you see the Zapruder film and everything happen. And no matter what everyone said about heroics and the medals you got, your bottom line was, you said, as the Secret Service that day failed. And John Kennedy said, I don't want people on the sideboards. I want to be access. You can talk about all the things that went along, but I think there's a level of responsibility that is very impressive. And I wish we had more of that today around taking responsibility for yourself and your role and what you need to get done. And so, overcoming that, I'm sure, was very difficult, but I think it is a great message for people. No matter what you've done in your life and your career and what you've been involved with, you're going to have hard times, and moving on is really the only option you have, and get up and just keep moving forward.
And the only reason that I've been able to finally deal with it is because of Lisa. I was able to find someone in her that I could trust, I could talk to. She understood. And the more I talked, the better I felt. And that's really what you have to do if you have PTSD.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, my travels with Mrs. Kennedy, it's anywhere you buy books. It's a fantastic book, great stories, and the photos are just amazing. The beauty, and she was such a beautiful woman, and seeing the kids and her husband and all the foreign countries they traveled to is just, it was, to your point, Lisa, it was kind of going back to a more innocent time, and really was very, very comforting. So congratulations on the book. Anyone out there, I'd highly recommend to pick up a copy, even for your kids who want to know what the world was like many, many years ago. I think it's a great piece to read. And thanks again. Thank you so much for sharing that, and best of luck on your book sales.
Well, thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Dan.
Should insist on the people down there in Sao Paulo to have it printed in Portuguese.
Well, give me the word and I'll get on it. We're here for a couple of weeks. All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us, and everyone out there, as always, thank you so much for joining us on Come Rain or Shine.
Thank you very much, sir.